This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
This week on Leap Forward, we chat with Allan Cook, a veteran engineer with decades of experience in aerospace, defense, and infrastructure. Allan reflects on his journey from electrician to leading major projects like HS2, stressing the importance of talent, technology, and leadership. He shares insights on global collaboration, the rise of AI, and the need for long-term vision in engineering. Key takeaway: surround yourself with the best, embrace learning, and lead with confidence.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Allan Cook on this episode of Leap Forward. Allan, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
What I'd love you to do, first of all, is just briefly introduce yourself, your business, and the kind of the role you play in it.
Okay, well, my name is Allan Cook. I'm an engineer. I've spent all of my career working in engineering. My grandfather was a blacksmith. My dad was an electrician. I started my career as an electrician, working on the tools. I've just spent all of my career in various organizations, companies, from predominantly in aerospace and defense, but latterly in infrastructure. And I've been chairman of WS Atkins, which is an engineering consultancy organization, for 9 years. I was also chairman of HS2 for 3 years. And I'm now working with Henry Royce, the Henry Royce Institute, working on materials innovation with government, industry, and academia. So I've had a wide-ranging career, worked for some great people, worked for some great companies, and I've been very, very fortunate just in terms of working with some of these people throughout my career.
I mean, just listing off some of those projects, those organizations, that is a very impressive CV. I think kind of for me, what would be really interesting would be to understand a little bit about sort of how important you found it to be to have had that sort of engineering background and capability. Here you are, kind of operating at the very highest level of these organizations, but obviously, with that fundamental kind of engineering kind of sort of background, how important has that been to you in your career?
Critical. Just I've whenever people ask me, and they do at various stages, about my who is my role model, my dad was always the person that I looked up to, because he was a craftsman, and he had his own business. I served my time as an electrician with his business, and he taught me so much and continued to teach me so much. In terms of, it's not only about the engineering side of it, but it's about the involvement with people. I mean, we worked with large organizations. We also worked with people who wanted their kettle repaired, or their iron repaired, and so you were invited or asked to go into people's houses, communicate effectively, and it was so fundamental in everything that I've done so far, because being able to communicate, to listen effectively, and to also stand by what your values are, what your principles are. My dad had some very, very high standards. He had high standards of technical expertise, which I tried to emulate. I wish I could say that I was as good a craftsman as he was, but I've tried to follow that way through. So serving my time as an electrician, working on the tools has been fantastic, because it doesn't matter what you're involved in and how senior you get on in an organization. Chairman of WS Atkins, chairman of HS2, they're large engineering organizations. But fundamentally, they're dealing with the same. You are dealing with people. You're dealing with teams of people. You learn to respect those people, to work effectively within that team, and it's put me, I think. I wouldn't change anything about my career. I think I could have stayed on at school and went to university straight from school. I didn't. I did basically my education after school, into the vocational side of it, did all of my technical qualifications, and then went to university, and then did a degree. And for me, it worked. It worked really, really well. It's not for everybody, but it for me it worked effectively. So having that start in life, having that start in my career, has been so important to me.
And what have you taken away from each of those sort of major milestones in your career? Like what new skills, have you learned? How have you applied them, and how have they then kind of progressed you to kind of, kind of where, as I said, where you've got to now, which is effectively at the very top in a sense.
I think empathy, Justin. The I think people. I've always learned from my mistakes, and believe me, I've made my fair share of mistakes. Um, I've always had a very, very high work ethic, um, and I was taught right from the very beginning, from my dad and then from other people that I respect, within the organizations that I worked, that the success is basically 95% hard work and 5% basically inspiration, and talent. So I've always been prepared, in whatever, in even now, in the work that I'm doing, that the work and the work ethic is such an important part of it. And I've tried, whichever organization I've been involved with, whatever team I've been working with, that it's basically, a lot of it is down to hard graft, being prepared as a leader to put go the extra mile. Make absolutely sure that you are prepared to put in that extra effort and work effectively. And I think that for me anyway, um, I've tried to follow that, and instill that into people who I've had the great pleasure, of working with throughout my career.
You've obviously been involved in, numerous highly technical, um, large scale, and obviously with HS2 as a great example, kind of heavy infrastructure kind of projects and businesses. Looking at sort of where we are today, what challenges do you see? I suppose, in a sense, the country, and or the sector that's driving kind of the growth and sort of and being looked at as a way of overcoming those challenges face. What market forces are at play?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is a we are now in a global, and have been for a number of years actually. This is not a new thing, but it's a global economy. And the world is, not expanding, it is shrinking. And so the challenges, are, and you could list, I could list 10 factors that are impacting on the UK at this particular moment in time. Um, and they're all down to basically, how effective we are in the marketplace that we choose. And people, successful companies, successful people, people who actually can, inspire and motivate the best possible talent that they can. So I've always held the belief that, um, you don't have to be, as an individual or as a leader, you don't have to be the very, very best in what you do, But what you do need to do is surround yourself with the best people. And sometimes those people are actually um, better than you. They're more intelligent than you. And that's great, the fact that you're actually surrounding yourself. So for me, the challenge, the difference between a good company and a great company is the ability to recruit, retain, and motivate the best possible talent. And that is the fundamental problem that we face within the UK and probably on an international basis. How do we actually um, recruit, retain, and motivate the right? So once we have the talent, once we've actually been able to recruit, how do we actually how do we actually retain that talent, and how do we continue to motivate them to do their very best that they can? And so I think the fundamental challenge that we face, certainly from an engineering point of view, and I've been involved in this certainly for the last 40 years of my career, is how do we actually get the best talent within your organization? And time after time after time, I have seen organizations succeed by recruiting and retaining that talent. And time after time, I've seen organizations fail by ignoring that talent. And so it's for me it's fundamental. Just it really is down to the people that you can actually lead. That's really the point of it.
So alongside leadership, and you talked about this at the beginning, you talked about education, higher ed, you talked about the public sector, the private sector. What role does government, kind of the higher ed sector and industry play in that sort of development of talent? I suppose first of all, and obviously then we can talk more about the recruitment and retention. But how's that talent get created? What are their individual roles? What have you seen work?
I think I've worked extensively with the MOD, and I think working on Eurofighter, I led Eurofighter as the Group MD for a while with BA Systems, and working with the RAF and the MOD. You're actually it's such an important factor in the defence of the UK. We were doing, and the people in Wharton and Samlesbury and Farnborough, working for BA Systems, were doing such a fundamental part of it. But they were they relied very very heavily on the RAF and the government to provide that instinctively that sort of leadership in what it is and what it was we're trying to do. I'm now working with BAE Systems on doing some reviews of the next generation of fighter aircraft, and again, this is going to be a 3-nation program with Japan and Italy and the UK. Can you imagine how difficult that is going to be to actually integrate all of this together? If we thought it was difficult with Eurofighter, this next generation is going to be a step change. So having the government, from my point of view, and it was exactly the same with Atkins. It was exactly the same with HS2. The government have such a fundamental role in this, and I was chairman of high value manufacturing Catapult. And the catapults were set up specifically by government with industry, government, and universities, academia, to work closely together to develop the next generation or innovation and help companies, small, medium enterprises, large organizations, to make the best use of the technology that was available. And for me, I think that so the government role is such an important part of it. And one of the things that continues, sorry, to frustrate me is that the way that our political system is set out is that it is very, very short term. So we've heard just recently about the decision, or at least the decision from a government that says we are going to look at a next runway for Heathrow, a third runway for Heathrow. We have been talking about this since the 1950s, and it's what whatever the arguments are for or against it. And I was involved with Boris Johnson when he was mayor of London about putting forward what they call Boris's Island for another alternative to Heathrow, and a very innovative one that didn't really go anywhere. But these are long-term programs. These are 10, 15, 20-year programs. So it's exactly the same with Atkins. Um, but the government, their vision is really over a relatively short period of time. Even in the 3 years that I was with HS2, I worked for three different secretaries of state in that period. And so it was one government, it was the Conservative government. But I mean, I, by the way, there were four different prime ministers in that stage, but there were three different secretaries of state. So it was very, it's very dynamic, and that they're actually the way that they look at things is relatively short time periods. However, the programs like the new combat aircraft, Eurofighter, HS2 cross basically the Elizabeth line, HS1, the frigate program, the submarine programs. These are long-term programs, and unfortunately, those two do not marry particularly well. So I think that the getting government, and it's not. I don't believe that it's a fault, if you like, or the blame does not lie with government. It lies in our political system of how we see long-term programs um, getting. I mean, actually, if you look at the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, their view, and has been for a number of years now, is 2030, 2040. That's their, and 2050. That's their long-term view. And because of the way that their government is structured, and you can argue about human rights, etc., and of course that comes into it. But actually, their view is okay. We're going to invest in a program, NEOM as an example, that is going to be 20 or 30 years in gestation. We don't have that luxury in the UK.
That vision, I think, is I think absolutely what I'm hearing loud and clear. And I just so happened to be in Dubai today, and this morning, was reminded the fact that Dubai right now is building 3 additional runways. And they're doing so, in a microcosm of the time that we've been certainly sort of since the 1950s. I mean, Dubai didn't even exist really, as a city back in the 50s, right? So I think the vision piece is really interesting. What about the role of education and higher education? How do you see the kind of the relationship between education and vocation?
I mean, as I mentioned earlier on, just I think I went through, did O levels, had the opportunity to go to university, and decided to take a vocational route. For me, it worked very well. I wanted to do more vocational qualifications, and so for me, it worked really well. It doesn't work for everybody. My grandson is currently just been accepted for Strathclyde University to do civil engineering, and he's leaving school at 17 and going to go directly into university. His choice. And I think that I'm sure that there's, no, I know that there are lots of benefits of doing that, of course. But for me, I think the marrying of vocational, mine was a 4-year degree course, honors degree course. And I did 6 months at university and 6 months in industry, 6 months at university, 6 months in industry, 6 months in industry, 6 months at university, and then a full year at university when I did my finals. So I got the chance to work with a number of organizations, some big, some small, and I think it broadened my horizon, and it taught me a number of things. It taught me, number one, I was never ever going to work for the government in an executive role, because having worked at Sellafield, I saw what was going on there, and I said, no, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go into private industry, which is exactly what I did. And I think that that link between education and industry is so. I think I've probably overused the word fundamental, but it is so important in terms of what it is that we're trying to instill into the younger generation.
And we've talked about talent here, fundamentally agree with you on what do you see as being uh, the change that's happened in your career around the type of skills and competencies that you need to do the job today? And what gaps do you see across the kind of the sector? Um, and then I suppose the third question, if it's all right, is then how do we develop those?
Well, I mean, there's been so much. There's been so much change just in terms of where I started my career in the 1960s through where we are now, in terms of technology. Um, it's it is quite remarkable. It's exponential, and so I've seen not only in engineering but in technology so many changes in technology. Most of it beneficial. I would maybe argue even all of it beneficial to determining what innovation and how we deal with technology. I think that it's been absolute. I've been very fortunate to be, to actually have been in some ways a part of that. But the fundamental, I said right at the very beginning of what what I learned from my dad really, and that is an empathy with people. So that fundamental hasn't really changed. So um, because of the changes in technology, it's allowed us to do certain things that wouldn't have been possible in in sort of 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. Some of the things that if you think about what we do actually now on a mobile unit, the fact that you and I are communicating, you sitting in Dubai, and me sitting in North Queensbury. I mean, could we have done that 15 years ago? Absolutely not. Could we have done it 10 years ago? Well, we would have struggled. But actually now we can do it we can do it very effectively. So I think that I've seen so many changes there that have actually added to the value of what we do. Some of which I think probably have been abused. I think there's a lot of communication now about social media and how that is influencing some of the younger generation. You absolutely get that. But I think the fundamentals of what we're trying to do, um, in terms of technology and technological advancement, is it never ever ceases to both amaze me and inspire me. It's just amazing what we. So the skills. I don't think I've probably answered your question properly, Justin. But the skills that we're looking to do now, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, still fundamentally important. Civil engineering, understanding how things are put together. Um, I mentioned my grandson, and he went to part of the open day in the Strathclyde University, and I sat through one of the lectures. And one of the lectures came in and explained, just as a sort of a trial, basically an example of what a lecture in civil engineering was going to look like. This man was absolutely inspirational. He was just, and he explained it by using basically moments and bending moments, and how that has to be applied when you're actually designing and developing a bridge, and what that is from. He was absolutely amazing. So these sort of skills from and in terms of education are going to be fundamental, and are fundamental and have been fundamental to our generation, my generation previously, and will continue to be in the future. Of that, I am absolutely convinced.
Hmm. It's really interesting that talking about sort of, I suppose, kind of the pace of and the rise of the use of technology and AI, and applying that, I suppose, in a sense to the teaching and the learning of skills today. What's your kind of perspective on that? Sort of how is technology transforming the way you teach or the way you learn? And I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Well, I think we touched on it earlier, just recently, just in the last 5 minutes or so, about how easy it is to communicate um, when you're sitting in Dubai and I'm sitting in North Queensbury. Um, but actually, um, that is fine for what we're doing today. But in the leadership role, there is not, in my mind, there is absolutely nothing to substitute for a face-to-face meeting, where ideas can be shared, thoughts can be shared, the discussions around the best way of dealing with a particular challenge. These sort of things have to be a part of what it is that we're trying to do. So, sort of interpersonal skills are so fundamentally important to everything that we do. And I've seen so many successful people who have been very, very effective in developing and using those interpersonal skills. Amazing, just absolutely amazing. But again, we're using, you and I are using now the technological advantages and advances that have been made to allow us to actually do the things that we're doing now, which is brilliant. But it doesn't, there isn't a substitute for the fact that we're working in a closely lit team. In HS2, as an example, most of the time that I was involved in HS2, it was through COVID. So a lot of the work that we did was like this, on a Zoom call or a Teams call. But the real fundamental work went on in the sites that we were operating on, and we were operating on over 200 sites, even at that particular point in time in 2018, 2019. You know, imagine how difficult that was to actually do that, to ensure that we could still maintain the schedule that we were trying to work to.
You gave me a great sort of example of this earlier about the Eurofighter project with Japan, Italy, and the UK. Um, the cultural piece. Tell me a little bit about sort of how you like to kind of embed or create, develop a culture in which everyone thrives.
Well, I think that, as I say, I've been very, very fortunate, lucky, to work with some great people and some great organizations. And every, every person that I've worked with, no, let me rephrase that. The majority of the people that I've worked with have really, I've been I have admired their culture, and I've admired the fact that they've actually been able to um, really install their culture and their values. It's really more about values, Justin, than it is about culture. It's the values that you instill in people. So I think diversity and inclusion are absolutely critical in the international world that we live in now. So being able to make full use of the skills that are available in whatever gender, or the ethnic minority area. So having that ability to pull all of that together. When I was at Atkins, we had a large part of our business was in Bangalore, and I visited Bangalore on several occasions in my 9 years with Atkins, and it never ever ceased to amaze me the um, the excitement, the inspirational side of these people who, many cases, had um, didn't have the same sort of living standards that we have, that we were fortunate to have. But boy, did they have the desire and the work ethic to make things really, really work effectively. And the cultural side of it and the values that you have within the organization is so important. Atkins was a perfect example of that. Um, and HS2, under the leadership uh, of Mark Thurston, he instilled in the organization as chief executive values that were so important. And so we never ever started a meeting without an example of values like leadership, quality, safety, communications. These were and respect. These were all examples that Mark put within the organization, and they were cultural examples, but they were the values that he held, and they were instilled within the organization. And I guarantee Mark's been, excuse me, out of HS2 now for probably about 18 months or so. But I guarantee if you're going to HS2 now, those values, if you go into the organization, those values will still be important because it's been instilled in that in the 6 or 7 years that Mark was there as CEO. As I say, we never ever we never ever started a meeting, whether it was a government meeting, whether it was a board meeting, or whatever it was. We never ever started a meeting unless we talked about an example of how important those values were, and an example. And it was only a 5-minute slot, but somebody always made that point, and that really inspirational leadership side is really, I think. And the values that it instills is important to making organizations and individuals successful.
We've talked a little bit already about talent and acquisition, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about how do you think about developing and retaining that talent?
Well, I think a lot of it just goes back to what we've just been talking about in terms of the values. Um, I mean, first of all, people want to work for a successful organization. That is basically instilled in them. I mean, you know, nobody really wants to work for an organization that is financially, or whether that is basically not succeeding in terms of what they're setting out to achieve. So it's not all about financial. But so nobody wants to work for an organization that is failing or has the potential to fail. Everybody wants to work for a successful organization because success breeds success. And it's not a case of whether it's growing 5% or 10% or 15%, even if it's actually staying static, as long as it's successful in what it is that it's trying to achieve. And I think that so being able to retain talent means that you have to be able to demonstrate that you are successful and that you are pushing for success in everything you do. Success in developing talent, success in making the best use of the pool of talent that we have available. And that means making sure that we have diversity and inclusion included and embedded into what we're trying to do. So what is being voiced in North America at this particular moment in time fills me with an abhorrent, because we're missing the point. The point is that unless we engage with the bandwidth of talent that we have available, we are going to miss opportunities. And I think so. So being able to inspire, enthuse, make sure that you have the right working conditions, make sure that people are rewarded for success, not for failure, is, I think, really part of what it is that we're trying to do.
What major trends that you're seeing at the moment are you most excited about?
Well, I think probably people would expect me to say that I'm really excited about artificial intelligence, and actually, I might be excited about artificial intelligence, but I'm more excited about what is going to be able to, what are we going to do with the data that has been generated? Because actually, machine learning and artificial intelligence has been around for decades. It's just that we haven't had the capability and the capacity to deal with the data that's being generated. 10 years ago in Atkins, we were working on BIM, which is effectively making full use of the data that was available in terms of designing and developing infrastructure works, where it's the ability to actually take a very, very complex program like an airport design or a bridge design or a railway design and pull all of that together is really, it's very, very difficult with artificial intelligence, and that's so that trend, I think, of making full use of that, it will free up more people, take the administration work out of it, and allow people to do more of the things that only humans can actually do. The empathetic side of things, the communication side of things, those sort of things. So it allows people to actually do that. So I think that that's one thing. I think another aspect is the fact that we are now, as I mentioned earlier, really embracing a global approach to business. And I know that that might fly in the face of what's been said about tariffs and the whole thing, but actually, it's really, it's all about how we're actually developing in a global. And you must see that just in being in Dubai. Um, the fact that the whole, this is an international and global business that we're doing. So I'm excited about the opportunities that are going to present themselves. I think that I do get concerned about some of the short-term thinking that goes on, particularly in Western democracies. There's still, I think we just need to be thinking longer term than what we are at this particular moment of time.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's entirely. I think talent can come from anywhere, and I think it very much speaks to your sort of diversity point. And like you said, here, 200 country representatives from 200 countries here right now, and that kind of pollination of perspectives is what we need to drive innovation forward. I think absolutely agree with you. If you were looking back and could give yourself one piece of advice, as you started out, what would that be?
I think that it would be around education, Justin. I think, as I said, I took a vocational route, but I think I think education is so important, and I think that making the best use of my education in terms of what it's been. I think that I've perhaps procrastinated too much, and so I would really like to have improved my decision making process more effectively, making decisions. So instead of trying to wait for the full 100% of the facts, you know, 9 times out of 10, if I'd had 90% or 95% of it, I could have made that decision, and I should have made that decision. And I think the other thing is that um, in this journey, the journey that certainly I've been, I think, probably very fortunate to embark on, um, I think that I've been able to surround myself with some very talented people, but I think that perhaps I've um, put up with, or actually maybe not made some changes that I should have made along my career that I probably needed to make. And again, I think it's a little bit of procrastination. I don't think anybody would accuse me of being lacking in decision making, but I think maybe thinking a little bit too long about the process and actually work and operate more effectively and more efficiently. But I think that from an overall point of view, I still go back to it. I have been incredibly lucky in working with some people that I still, even to this day, people that I worked with 30 years ago, I still keep in touch with them because of their impact that they've had on me in my career. And that's really, really important.
I've so enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate you coming on to Leap Forward. Thank you very much.
And my pleasure, Justin. Been lovely meeting you. And I wish you every success.